Welcome to tonight's talk on the Ten Commandments. Now, most of us know that the Ten Commandments are the foundation of God's teaching on morality. And often when we think of morality or ethics, we think in terms of rules. And the commandments are, in fact, rules. They're commandments. But we shouldn't think of them as only rules. The teaching tradition of the church in the first centuries of the church, when the early church fathers were teaching, and all the way up through like the Middle Ages and like the 13th century with Thomas Aquinas and everything, all throughout that beginning portion of the church, the Ten Commandments were taught not as a bunch of rules, like what you can't do, but on the Ten Commandments were used as a teaching method, so to how to grow in virtue. And that's how we're going to look at it tonight. So even when we hear the word commandment, and sometimes I bristle at the word commandment, but even when we do this, we want to do our best not to think in terms of rules, but to think of a loving Father who is sharing the wisdom and the tools that to propel us forward towards greater virtue and towards a meaningful life. That's what we want to extract out of the Ten Commandments. That's our goal. That's the vision for tonight. So, before we begin the overview, let me give you just a quick disclaimer. Whenever you hear a talk on like morals and ethics and all that kind of stuff, there's a tendency for some people to think that the person up here thinks they got it all together. That is not the truth, okay? As we go through the Ten Commandments, I'm not going to list off the ones that I still have problems with. I'm not going to share that with you as we go through it. I'm not going to. But just know that I wrestle with some of these as well. So I'm offering a talk in Growing in Virtues. It doesn't mean that I think I've achieved it myself. But I can read books, I can listen to good priests and sort of grab things together and then pass that back out to you. I'm still capable of doing that, even if I'm still being challenged. By the way, the books that go into tonight, I'll just touch on this briefly. I'll put this up on a screen at the end. There's a little tiny book here called The Ten Commandments by Monsignor Charles Pope. Great little book. It's 100 pages, but they're small pages. I've read the whole thing just for you guys tonight. It's a great little book, there's about 100 pages worth of the Ten Commandments in that one because it's all in the Ten Commandments. Then there's the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which you've all got. And there's about 120 pages in there, very detail-oriented kind of stuff. And then there's a book by Peter J. Kraft called Catholic Christianity, subtitle, A Complete Catechism of the Catholic Beliefs Based on the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So he took the Catechism of the Catholic Church and then sort of rewrote it in his own words, and he's a great writer. And there's what do I have? There's about 80 pages on the Ten Commandments in here. So these just happen to be 3 books that happen to be sitting on my shelf at home that helped me to put together this talk. The Ten Commandments are an incredibly large subject. I'm not going to cover every facet of every last little piece because it's just huge. But we're gonna look at what I thought would be interesting, what I thought might help us to take them and make them a part of our lives. And I'll only have time to hit the basics. There's a lot more than this. With that all having been said, right? I'm not perfect. We're just hitting the basics, but all that kind of stuff. Here's the overview. The overview, we're going to look at the Old Testament view of the Ten Commandments, because the Old Testament is where we get the Ten Commandments from. Then we're going to look at the New Testament view. What did Jesus have to say about the Ten Commandments? Then we're going to look at the present day view. What does the modern world think about the Ten Commandments? Then we're going to do a walkthrough of the Ten Commandments. That walkthrough can also be known as the part of the talk where some of you might get really angry at me. We'll hopefully not have that be the case, but it's a talk on morality after all, and I've got to share what I've gleaned from all this stuff. Anyway, so speaking of the Old Testament, we'll start with the Old Testament. In the book of Exodus is where God gives the Ten Commandments to Moses. They're wandering through the desert. They stop at Mount Sinai, and at some point, he leaves everyone down at the base of the mountain. He goes up, talks to God, and he gets the Ten Commandments. This happens in Exodus chapter 20 is where we first hear the Ten Commandments. And then in Deuteronomy chapter 5, there's sort of like a retelling. So you hear the Ten Commandments in 2 different places in the Bible, but Exodus 20 is where we actually get them, and then Deuteronomy 5 just sort of repeats them. But you do have two tellings of the Ten Commandments there. Now, Interestingly, if you've ever read the passage in Exodus chapter 20, there's actually 14 different things in the 10 Commandments, right? It's 14 different things. So we sort of group them together. Some of these things are grouped, like things like "thou shalt not kill." That sort of like deserves its own thing. But some of the others, there's like 2 or 3 things where we sort of group together and say that's a concept. Here's another 2, 3. We group them together, and that's a concept. And different churches over the centuries have grouped them together slightly differently. There's actually about 6 to 8 different ways that you can group these things together. So if you're coming to the Catholic Church from another denomination, the numbering system might be off. Wait, hold on. There's different numbering formats. So the numbering system might be a little off because we've grouped them differently. That doesn't change the fact that the underlying text of Exodus 20 is still in the 10 Commandments. We know that all 14 things need to be absorbed by us. So there's mainly 2 schools of thought. There's some little offshoots, but there's two main schools of thought. The first school of thought says that the idea of a graven image, thou shalt not make for yourself a graven image, that needs to be raised to the status of its own commandment. And rather than being grouped with, you shall have no other God before me, right? So you can see how you shall have no other God can sort of incorporate the you shall not also have graven images. So some people group them together, some people put them separately. The second group focuses on where God says that we shouldn't covet things. Now, covet is not a normal word that we use all the time, so I'll define it. To covet means to strongly or immoderately desire something that belongs to someone else. That's to covet something. And the second group takes its cue from St. Augustine, who grouped them slightly differently. He put graven and put it in together with thou shalt not have other gods. But the covet section towards the end, there's 2 sections for the covet. One is to covet a neighbor's wife, and the other is to covet a neighbor's goods. And he says those are 2 different things, because this has to do with lust, and this has to do with greed. 2 very different sins that we want to avoid. So he looked at that, and he took his cue mainly from Deuteronomy chapter 5, where it's worded slightly differently, so it sort of separates those 2. But again, the wording, we take all of what's in the 10 Commandments to heart, even if they're numbered differently. So if the numbering that we go through is different than what you're used to, just know that everything's there. That's what I want to get through. The way Catholics number things, and for the rest of the evening, I'm only going to talk about the way Catholics number things. The way Catholics number things, the first 3 commandments have to do with our relationship with God, and the last 7 have to do with our relationship with other people. So 3 to God and 7 to other people. In most of the other ways, most of the other ways, it's the first 4 are to God and the last 6. But again, it's the same subject matter. So there's no difference in the end. Now, several weeks ago, when we talked about creation in the fall, and part of that talk was creation. So Genesis 1, and this was the creation of the natural order. So God took everything that was and created time and space itself, and then started filling time and space with things and space and planets and us and all that kind of stuff. So that was the creation of the natural order. Tonight we discussed the 10 Commandments, which is the creation of the moral order. And both of them are God creating order out of chaos. In Genesis chapter 1, it's more the physical world that comes out of the chaos. And here we're now talking about the spiritual world that's coming out of chaos and making sense. So when Moses receives the 10 Commandments, he goes up the mountain and receives them. And when he comes down with the 2 tablets with the 10 Commandments, the Bible describes this as the tablets were written by the very finger of God. So Moses didn't go up there with 2 blank tablets and a chisel and the stenographer. No. Bible says they were written by the very finger of God. This is important. But then there's other laws. There's other laws in the Old Testament that are written by Moses. So they're not written by the finger of God, but written by one of his prophets, Moses. And the reason this comes about, I find kind of interesting. There's other reasons in a sec, but one of the reasons is this. Christian, I'm going to use you as an example right now. In a sec, hold on, wait, in a sec. The way I describe the way I think about the Ten Commandments is that they're sort of external laws. So they try and stop me from doing something, and those commandments come in externally to me. For instance, and now we're getting to Christian. Christian, I love you, but I'm going to use you as an example here. One of them is thou shalt not kill. But let's say I got a thing against Christian. I want to kill Christian. So one of the commandments is thou shalt not kill. So imagine there's this big traffic cone between me and Christian stopping me from doing that, right? If there's this external commandment. But what if I'm kind of clever and I say, well, I still want to do harm to Christian. I don't. But I still want to do harm to Christian. I still want to get him. So I want to figure out a way around this external traffic cone. So I hire somebody to kill him. Right? Now I've gone around the commandment. I haven't violated the commandment, have I? Because it's an external. And by wordplay, I can get around the commandment. So because it's external, I can find a way around to do that. So I can just picture Moses going, okay, 10 commandments, okay, but now the people are getting clever. They're starting to walk, they're figuring out ways around it, So here's the first Mosaic commandment. Thou shalt not hire somebody to kill someone. You can just see them writing these down and starting to put these things together. There's 613 Mosaic laws on all sorts of things. And the way I look at them, some of them are like filling in the gaps, making sure that I can't get around. So sort of like laying out extra external cones between me and Christians so that I can't do something bad. I'm no longer going to be saying anything negative in that sense. I love you, so we'll get past that. We'll pull all of that negative energy off the table now. Okay, so but then there's also in those Mosaic laws, there's also a whole bunch of extra laws like social laws, food laws, purity laws, feasts, sacrifices and offerings, all that kind of stuff. But again, 613 laws that are what's called Mosaic laws, written by Moses. The 10 Commandments come directly from the finger of God, and then the rest of them, the 613 Mosaic laws, come from Moses. So when we go to the New Testament, what does Jesus have to say about the 10 Commandments? Well, he says right off the bat that he did not come to abolish the 10 Commandments. He did not do that. But Paul tells us in his letters that Christ did free us from the laws that were created by Moses, from those Mosaic laws. Those 613, which is a good thing because I can't memorize 613 laws. I have a hard enough time with the 10. In doing this, what Jesus did was he made the moral code easier for us to remember, but also harder, because instead of those external traffic codes, he now makes the laws internal. And I find this really, really fascinating. He replaces those external laws with internal laws. He takes the 10 Commandments and a whole bunch of those 613 laws, and he reduces them down into 2 commandments. Anybody know what they are in the New Testament? What does he say? Here are the 2 commandments. Love God with all your heart, mind, soul, strength, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? And when you do that, when you say that, all of the external stuff goes away. I don't need the traffic cones between me and, I'm back to you, Christian. Sorry. I don't need the traffic cones between me and Christian, because within me, I've got an internal law that says I need to treat him as if I'd want to be treated myself. I can't even get out to where the traffic cones would be. There's nothing I can do. I can't hire, I can't do that. There's no way around it. So it makes it easier to remember, but they're actually more restrictive, because if you understand what love is, it controls everything in a beautiful way. So it sums up several of the external laws into internal laws. There's no getting around it with wordplay anymore. So not only does it make it easier to remember, harder to live up to, but it also demonstrates how the 10 Commandments are based in love. Based in the divine love, which is agape, right? We've discussed agape before. Willing the good of the other. Wanting the best possible outcome for someone else. And that is a high bar to hit. So they're all based in agape. Jesus also clarifies, by the way, that when he says love God and love your neighbor, he clarifies in the New Testament that neighbor means everyone, not just your kinsman, not just your literal neighbors who you know, but everyone. He does this in the parable of the Good Samaritan and other places. He says in, I didn't write it down here, but I remember it's Matthew chapter 5, verse 43. It's part of the Sermon on the Mount, where he says, "You have heard it said that you should love your neighbors and hate your enemies. But I say to you, you should love everybody," basically is what he goes on to say. Because what good is it is if you can only love the people who love you, right? There's no real benefit in that. So you want to expand it. The very fact that he says, you have heard it said that you should love your neighbor and hate your enemies, means that was the understanding at the time. Even though, if you go back into the Old Testament, it says in there somewhere, love your neighbor. But that meant love your kinsmen. Israelites, love Israelites. And hate your enemies, because that's what Jesus is saying we're going to stop. So he's changed it by going through this. I actually did have it written down. Good thing I remembered it. Anyway, so Jesus is explicitly teaching us to expand the Ten Commandments from the letter of the law to the spirit of the law, right? If I'm not supposed to, I keep going back. I'm sorry. You're just going to have to put up with this. If I'm not supposed to kill Christian, I'm also not supposed to break his arm. I'm also not supposed to do all sorts of things, because you expand it into the spirit of the law. It encompasses a whole bunch more stuff. Jesus says, you have heard it said that you shall not kill. But I say, don't even be angry with somebody. This all is happening in Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. There's all sorts of good stuff in there. By Jesus' words, we hear that the Ten Commandments are a starting point, but then we need to expand them in the direction of love, in the direction of that agape love where we're looking out for everyone. So, that's the New Testament. Now, what about the present day? What does the present day have to say about the Ten Commandments? What does modern culture think of the Ten Commandments? I see a lot of smirks going on in the room right now. What does the modern culture think about the Ten Commandments? Father John Ricardo said, he talks about a commercial that he saw. I never saw it, but he talks about a commercial that he saw for one of the cable channels. This was back a while ago when cable was really big. One of the cable channels, one of the cable movie channels or whatever, and the commercial was saying that come see our Sunday night lineup. We're guaranteed to break 20% more commandments than any other channel. I mean, it's almost literally using it as a punchline. So I think we're in agreement that our modern culture isn't really on board with, yay, 10 commandments, we're gonna abide by them. It's sort of gone by that. Matter of fact, I would say that modern culture is actively hostile towards the 10 commandments, actively hostile towards any kind of moral responsibility whatsoever. But our mindset and our goal is eternal. We want to get to heaven. We want to be with God. So we don't care what the world thinks. In this room, we don't care. But we do recognize the world is the way it is. We want to grow in virtue. We want to be with God. So we're going to look at it a different way. But we recognize that the world sees it a different way. And we have to be aware of that so that we can guard against the outside world influencing us with the way it is. So, one last thing before we start through the list. As we go through the Ten Commandments, we'll notice that some of them are worded positively and some of them are worded negatively. What do I mean? I mean, some of them are like, you shall, blah, 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 and some of them are, you shall not, right? So some of them are positive and some of them are negative. And what we're going to do is we're going to put up what it actually says, and then we're going to always, if need be, if they're written in a negative way, I'm going to flip them to a positive way to say it. And the reason is, I said at the very beginning, we're going to look at the Ten Commandments as a way to grow in virtue. And the way I look at that is, if we look at this like there's a line here, and over here is virtue, and over here is sin. And the ones that are worded negatively are saying, avoid this. And the ones that are worded positively are saying, go towards this. So when we find one that's worded this way, we're just going to flip the wording around so that we're aiming towards virtue all night long. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. And each time I reword it, I'm going to ask you, is this an okay way to reword it? I think you'll agree with me. We'll see. But it allows us to think about growing towards virtue as opposed to just, obeying the rules. So, first commandment. First commandment is, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me. It's mostly positive, but there is that word no in there, which is negative. So I'm going to reword it slightly to, I am the Lord your God, you shall be faithful to the one true God. Same meaning? Same meaning. But it just focuses our mind in a different direction. Now, this wording goes back to the Nicene Creed when we say, I believe in one God, right at the beginning of the Creed. You all remember the Creed talk, right? Anybody remember what that first line is in Latin? Bonus points. Credo, right, credo. You remember credo? That's good. Credo in unum Deum. Did you remember it? Just the credo part? A question.
Why are we changing God's words? If they're written by God, why are we playing with his words?
Boy, you still got his words right here. But I'm just saying, for the purposes of aiming our direction in the way that the Catholic Church has taught the Ten Commandments earlier on, and some people still do, is we're going to be aiming for the virtues. If you want to, you can focus directly on here. But we're going to focus. Some of us, I'm going to focus down here. So the Nicene Creed, that first line is Credo in unum Deum. I believe in one God. And if you remember the talk, we say that not because that's just the first line of the creed. We say that because that's the objective reality of the situation. We're not all in here learning about the Catholic Church because, well, this just happens to align with our personality. We say we've now found or are possibly investigating whether or not this is objective truth. And if we do that, this is being faithful to the one true God. So there is one true God. We have found that truth. We proclaim that truth, and we entrust ourselves to that truth. And as such, we reject idols. Big word. What is an idol? In Old Testament times, a lot of people believed in multiple gods. There was the sun god, there was the moon god, there was the god of the mountains, there was the god of the animals, there was the god of the sea creatures. There was all these different gods, and everybody and they did incense to different gods and all that kind of stuff. And what happened is they would have little carved idols all around the house for the different gods. And this is why God says in this first commandment, you shall not make for yourself a graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them. In other words, you shall not create an idol. Now, God can't mean that you're not allowed to make any carved images, that you're not allowed to make any artwork, that you're not allowed to do this. He can't possibly mean that, because just a few chapters earlier, before the Ten Commandments, he commanded Moses to fashion a serpent out of bronze, to raise it up. We've talked about this, right? So to create an image, a graven image, a likeness of something that's on the earth, he commanded Moses to do that. And then a few chapters after he gives him the Ten Commandments, he commands him, when he says how to build the tabernacle, he commands him to create images of cherubim, which are angels, which are up in heaven. So God can't possibly mean you cannot create a graven image, you can't create any images of these things, because he commands Moses to do that. But he never commands Moses to bow down and serve them. In other words, he doesn't tell him to create an idol. But artwork, that's fine. Okay, images, that's fine. It's very clear. Now, some people think that Catholics worship images, that we worship statues, and that's not wrong. That's not wrong. That is wrong. Sorry, I'm looking down at my notes and I'm saying the wrong things. That is wrong. Catholics don't worship images or statues. Worship is reserved for God alone. The worship or the veneration that we pour out are towards the things that the statues or the artwork points to. If it's an image or a statue of Jesus, then we're thinking about Jesus, and that's who we're worshiping. If it's an image or a statue of a saint, then we're thinking about that saint, and we're offering veneration. Never worship towards a saint. Veneration towards that saint. So it's not a matter of that we think of that image as what we're worshiping. Think about in your house right now. Go home, and you've all probably, I assume, you've got pictures of family members, of a girlfriend, boyfriend, a spouse, or whatever, cousins, whatever. You've got pictures of people that you love throughout your house. Maybe they're in a little frame on the desktop. Maybe they're hanging on the wall, whatever. You got pictures of people all around your house. None of you love those pictures. You love what the picture points to. You love the people who are represented by that image. That's the same thing that happens in a Catholic church. When we see statues, when we see beautiful artwork, it's pointing us towards what it is that we worship, what it is that we venerate. That's important to know. In the modern day, no Christian, no Catholic worships or believes in an idol. Or do they? See, an idol doesn't have to be a god, lowercase g, fake god. An idol doesn't have to be a god. It could be anything that stands between you and God. Anything that obscures your vision towards God. Anything that causes a certain type of confusion. It pulls you away from God because the idol comes first. And that's the problem. The idol comes first. Things like greed or lust. If your attachment to running after money will make you do something that's immoral, something that you know that God wouldn't want you to do, then greed is your idol. If lust, it will force you to, will entice you to do something that you know that God has said is bad for you, then lust is an idol. And lust can be all sorts. Idols can be all sorts of things. It can be negative things like a strange pursuit for power that's just overwhelming, or it can even be good things. Things like a job. Your job can become an idol. If your job in your mind is above God, because God's not first, your job is above God, then eventually it could happen that you're asked to do something immoral and your job wins out. So you start doing that. But if God's first, you'll never do that. You follow? So even something good can become an idol if that's above God and it doesn't keep you on the right track. So an idol is anything that causes someone to push God aside and make a decision contrary to the decision that they would make if God was first. So idols do exist. They're just not carved out of wood anymore. They're a little bit more subtle than that. Bishop Barron says, when there's clarity about what we worship, then the whole rest of our life falls into order. But if there's ambiguity in what we worship, then everything can get messed up. So we want to be clear on what we worship, and it should be God. This is all on the first commandment. Now, how do we expand this in love? I said Jesus wants to expand each of these commandments in love. So we'll do this at the end of, I think, most of, if not all of these sections. How do we expand this in love? Well, we can focus on our genuine, faithful worship of the one true God, and we can make sure that we've got our priorities straight and don't let anything else in our life come above God and obscure our vision of God. Second commandment. Second commandment says, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. You shall not. So that's a negative. And with no offense to you in the back, we're going to reword that for the rest of us who want to see a positive direction of this. Okay, so how would we reword this for the positive? Okay, I'm just going to goof around. So you shall not take the name of the Lord God of the Lord your God in vain, or you can say you shall treat the sacred name of God with respect. Same concept. Worded differently, obviously, but same concept. The sacred name of God. 2 weeks ago when we were talking about the Eucharist, I talked about the word sacred and the opposite word, which is, did anyone remember? Profane. Profane, right. So sacred comes from the Latin sanctus, where we get sacred from, and saint and sacrament and all these different words that comes from sanctus, sacred, holy. Setting it apart for a divine purpose. And then profane was the Latin profanum. Pro meaning in front of or outside, fanum, the temple. So something that's just ordinary, because the sacred things are in the temple and the ordinary things are outside the temple. So we don't want to treat the Lord's name as if it's just sort of ordinary. It's sacred. So today, many people have lost the sense of the sacred or the sense of the holy. And not so with Catholics. Look at our liturgy, sacred. Look at our buildings. There are portions of our buildings that are sacred. And we take that sacredness directly from the mouth of God. Because if we look a little bit later in Genesis from here, Moses comes down, gives the commandments to the people, and then eventually he goes back up and speaks with God. And God painstakingly describes how it is that he wants to be worshipped. It's not just sort of left up to us to figure out. God painstakingly describes how he wants the sacred liturgy conducted, and how the tabernacle, the building, is supposed to be constructed, all these different things. This is in Exodus chapters 25 through 31, and then again in chapters 35 through 40. So there's 13 chapters where God is describing to Moses, this is how I want worship to be conducted. And we take our cue from that. That's why certain things in the Catholic liturgy are sacred, because it comes from Scripture. And 13 chapters. I'm a math nerd, so I had to look this up. How many words are in those 13 chapters? Almost 11,000 words that God is using to describe how it is that he wants to be worshipped. To give you a perspective, the Gospel of Mark is only about 15,000 words. So he uses the same number of words, almost the same number of words as he uses in the entire Gospel of Mark, just to describe how he wants his liturgy done. And we take our cue from that. God explicitly says that he takes worship seriously. It's not supposed to be a laser light show with a band and all that kind of stuff and figuring it all out. It's not supposed to be that. That's a praise and worship service. That's fine. But the divine liturgy is supposed to be a little bit more than that. Anyway, so getting back to treating the sacred name of God with respect. God's name shouldn't be used as an expletive. I think we all know this without me having to say it. Or a subject of a non-important oath. Oh, I swear to God, blah, 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 blah. No. Now, if you're in court and somebody says you got to swear to God, okay, that's an important oath. But just sort of saying, oh, I swear to God, no. That's taking his name in vain. That's just using it as nothing. It's not good. Now, by the way, as I think about taking the Lord's name in vain, I think about this, and I'll toss it out for you guys to think about. Has anybody ever been like holding a nail and they're hammering it in and they miss the nail and you hit your thumb? Yeah, anybody ever done that or something very similar to that? What's the first word that comes out of your mouth? Don't. Brave woman. Okay, I wasn't going to actually give the words, but there's only two options, right? It's from the list of four-letter words, which I just heard over here. It's from the list of the four-letter words, or it's the name of God. Why is that? Out of the thousands upon thousands of words that are embedded in your brain, why is it that in a millisecond, out pops one of those four-letter words or the name of God? Why is it? I mean, it's not like we're thinking about it. Let's come up with the strongest word. No, it's weird. We've been programmed into this. Over the last several decades, over the last couple of centuries, there are people in this world who have sort of programmed us to have that instinctive response, which is, or reflexive response. It's not really instinctive. It's sort of a reflex. And as such, it's really hard to control. Okay, so if this weekend you're doing a project and you hit your thumb and out comes the name of God, don't beat yourself up too much about it. Say I'm sorry, etc. But it was a reflex. You really can't be held accountable for that. Okay. Just try not to do it intentionally, okay? Don't take the Lord's name in vain intentionally. But it is an interesting thing. Why, in a few milliseconds, those are the only two options that you get. And for you, it was only a half a millisecond, so it was okay. Anyway, so earlier I said that we don't want to use God's truly sacred name in an empty way, because that would be profane. But we also don't want to use his name as a curse. And frankly, even if we think we might have the power to do so, we don't have the power to tell God to damn anything. So it's a useless endeavor anyway, but it's also wrong, and it has to do with, well, we don't have that power. Last little thing, and this is like a trivia, almost a trivia point. There's certain times where we can like change the letters a little bit and think we got away from it, and we say like, gosh darn it. That's called an evasive synonym. Everybody knows what it is you meant to say, but you're being evasive. It means the same, synonym. It's evasive. You got away from it a little bit. It means the same thing. You've taken the Lord's name in vain. Don't do it. Gosh darn it is the same thing. Okay? Oh, cheese and crackers. Everybody knows what you're trying. Well, those of you who are familiar with that phrase, that's not a universal thing, but cheese and crackers kind of sounds like Jesus Christ, right? So that's one way somebody could invoke the name, the Lord's name, and get away with it. No, that's an evasive synonym. Don't do that either. We shouldn't do that. Again, if it's reflexive, just try to, bring that impulse back. Anyway, so how do we expand this in love? How do we expand treating the name of God with respect? Well, instead of being profane and empty like the rest of the world, we should hold ourselves to a higher standard. We should want to treat God's name with respect. We should want to treat each other's name with respect. We should want to treat language itself with respect, and to elevate that and to do something that is a little higher than everything else. Next commandment, the third commandment, and that is to remember to keep the Lord's Day. It's already done positive, so all of us can be in agreement. This is the one we're going to talk about. Now, a lot of people think that remember to keep holy the Lord's Day means that I'm supposed to give up an hour and go to Mass. And while that's true, that's not the full answer. It doesn't mean to give up an hour. It means to give up the whole day. Remember the Lord's Day. It doesn't say remember to keep the Lord's, holy the Lord's Day for an hour. It says remember to keep holy the Lord's Day. We're supposed to spend time together. We're supposed to get together and worship together as the body of Christ. We're supposed to do that. But in the Catechism, in paragraph 2172, it says this. I love this line. It says, on Sunday, what we're supposed to do is protest against the servitude of work and the worship of money. That's one of the things we're supposed to be doing on Sunday. Protesting against the servitude in work and worship of money. Every Sunday is meant to remind us of what it's going to be like when we're with God. We're not going to be working. Sundays are supposed to be a foretaste of heaven. Coming up in a couple of weeks is the season of Lent. I think we've discussed I think I've mentioned the liturgical year in the Catholic calendar, and we start with Advent as we're getting ready for Christmas, and then we go into ordinary time for a little while, and then we go into Lent, which is the 40 days before Easter. And Lent, which coming up here in about a month, it's a penitential period of time. We're supposed to reflect upon ourselves and to spend that time conforming ourselves a little bit closer to Christ. What I suggest to people is pick one thing about yourself that you know is a little off, and for those 40 days, concentrate on that. Try and get that a little bit better for that period of time. And what we do during that period of time, what we do during Lent sometimes is to, quote, give up something for Lent. Right? Just as penance, just as something to give back to God, saying, I'm trying to be better, and I'm going to hold back a little bit something, so I'm going to give up something. I'm going to give up chocolate for Lent. I'm going to give up sweets for Lent. I'm going to give up bacon for Lent. Whatever it is that really gets you excited, I'm going to give this up for Lent. But there's an interesting trivia piece on this, and this is why I'm going through all this. Whatever we give up, let's say we give up chocolate for Lent, not on Sundays. Even for Sundays, even during Lent, you're supposed to have chocolate. Because Sundays are always supposed to be a celebration. Sundays are always supposed to be a foretaste of heaven. And we're not going to be deprived in heaven. So even during Lent, if you've given up bacon, if you've given up chocolate, if you've given up sweets, you have them on Sunday. So I say this because as we move into Lent, you're all going to be challenged to give up something. But on Sunday afternoon, when you're having that chocolate, I just want you to remember who told you that you can have it on Sunday. Okay, just remember. Okay, my name's Greg. Anyway, so how do we expand this in love? How do we expand keep holy the Lord's Day in love? Well, we can connect with God every day. We can treat every hour that we're not at work and be grateful for that, and say, this is a little bit more of what it's going to be like in heaven. And we can make someone else's day a little bit more like heaven anytime we get the chance. So that's some of the things we can do. Number 4, the fourth commandment is to honor your father and your mother. Said positively already, so we'll leave it that way. And this one is really, really obvious. Children have a responsibility to show respect, gratitude, and obedience to their parents, period. But this, in turn, creates a complementary responsibility for the parents. Parents need to be worthy of that respect, gratitude, and obedience. Otherwise, it's sort of empty honor. No parent or child is perfect. No family life situation is perfect. Mine isn't perfect. You go back, I'm from a divorced family, etc. So my life isn't perfect. We all deal with what we have. But every parent should, as best they can, provide or protect their children. Be a good example. Be the primary moral educators for their children. Be spiritual examples for their children. Parents have the responsibility and the privilege of evangelizing their children in the faith. They should exercise a proper amount of discipline remembering, of course, that their kids, while they're under their protector, are still human people. They should be treated with respect as well. Why am I saying all this? I'm flipping this, right? Honor the mother and father. Well, there's no toddlers in the room. Oh, no, you're a little bit more than a toddler. So I don't have to speak to the toddlers in the room. I'm speaking to the folks that are parents or gonna be parents someday. In order to make their lives easier, to honor their father or mother, make it easy on them. Earn it. Be someone that's worthy of that. Because if a parent falls short, to some extent, there's a lack of foundation for that honor or respect. Again, there's imperfect situations. We make do with what we can, but we should strive to be the best that we can at all times. So how do we expand this in love? If honoring your father and mother is important, well, then honoring everybody is important. So we can honor even folks that are outside our mother and father, to our family, to our community, to everybody. We can extend honor when appropriate. And we recognize that the family is sort of the prototype for authority, so we can extend that sort of like into the employer-employee relationship, where we can extend honor to the employer, provided, of course, they're earning it, right? You can look at that, law enforcement and citizen, you can all that kind of stuff. As long as both sides are doing the right thing, we should extend honor in that direction. We should honor others, and we should ourselves strive to be worthy of honor ourselves. Number 5. You shall not kill. That's a negative one. So let's rephrase this so that we're not aiming in that direction, but we're aiming in that direction. You shall respect life. Now, first, to clarify the meaning of that first, you shall not kill. The original word in Hebrew, which I can't remember at the moment, the original word in Hebrew that is translated as kill doesn't really mean kill, it means murder. Premeditated, intentional murder of an innocent person. That's what it means. So thou shalt not kill has a specific meaning. It's a little bit more dark than thou shalt not kill. Killing is not ever fun, but there are some times that are justifiable. Justifiable war, self-defense, to preserve your own life, because you fall under that second one. You shall respect life. You respect your own life and your family. If somebody breaks in and it's time to execute self-defense, that's justifiable because you're preserving the innocent life. Now, this commandment sets the stage for the Catholic understanding or the Catholic position on capital punishment, which is in a bit of a state of flux right now. But for hundreds of years, the position on the Catholic Church with regard to capital punishment was that it was discouraged, but nevertheless it was allowed if there was no other way to protect society. If there was no other way to protect yourself from this guy, then capital punishment was allowed. But it was always discouraged because there's always a possibility for redemption. But if you think about some, I can't remember the guy's name, and if anybody remembers it, don't shout it out. But there was a drug lord, that's been incarcerated several times, and his buddies know that he's a billionaire. They're gonna make millions if they can break him out. He's been broken out several times. They start the tunnels from like a mile away from the prison. They dig underneath. They come right up underneath his cell, and he keeps going free. How do you protect yourself against this guy? In that kind of a situation, in an extreme situation, to protect society, then capital punishment was allowed, but always discouraged. In 2018, just a few years ago, the Pope declared that it was unacceptable, capital punishment was unacceptable in all circumstances. But he did not declare it ex cathedra, meaning infallibly. He didn't declare it that way. So therefore, there's still a vigorous debate, because there are some who say, yes, prisons have gotten so good that you can protect society. No, there's examples where that doesn't work. And then there's people that say that it changes a long-standing church teaching. So that debate is still happening. But the concept is that we respect life, so we avoid it at all costs. So how do we expand this in love? First of all, we can think of anything that simply hurts somebody. We don't have to go all the way to kill, going back to Christian here, right? Right? Thou shalt not kill. I can get around that. But, I'm not going to kill you, but I'm going to beat you up. No, that's not good either. So we want to expand that to say that I can't do anything to Christian that would be harmful, because that would be an expansion in love. Physically or emotionally. You can beat somebody up, verbally, and that's not good either. So both of those happen. Now, before I go on, because I got a little bit more to talk about with thou shalt not kill. Before I go on, I need to say this. I don't know the personal history of every single person in this room, and therefore I need to make this disclaimer. I need to say something very, very clearly. We're about to touch on some sensitive subjects, and for the next couple of minutes, and it's important to realize that there's some times where we look back on our life and we go, well, back then I did something, I'd never do it now. I've grown since then, I've become better, I've gotten more in touch, whatever. I wouldn't do that again, but that is in my past. There's no way I can get rid of it in my past. We grow throughout our lives. And if a person is repentant, if a person goes to God and says, I'm sorry for this or this or this, if a person is truly repentant, he goes to God sorry, then God will forgive anyone of anything that's in your past. And I want you to remember that as I go through this, in case I happen to touch on something that you've gone through. So back to how do we expand this? How do we expand "You shall respect life" in love? Well, we recognize that all life is sacred, from conception through natural death. Even our own life is not our own. Today's culture, which if you haven't figured out, I'm not really fond of, although I think it's going to get better. Today's culture wants us to believe that euthanasia is acceptable, that mercy killings are, it's okay, that physician-assisted suicide is just another medical option, and that abortion is an absolute human right. And they're all lies. They're all flat-out lies. These situations are incredibly personal, but it doesn't change the fact that today's culture has been working overtime to deceive us with very clever emotional arguments that work its way into us. We've got to be careful of this. It tries to get us to take an innocent life, sometimes our own. The Catechism in paragraph 2258 says, human life is sacred, and no one, under any circumstance, can claim for himself the right to destroy an innocent human being. We need to respect life, even our own. St. Paul says that you're not your own. You were bought with a price. It's Jesus on the cross. Now, when we're talking about end-of-life situations, sometimes we can go a little bit too far with this. We understand the teachings, and we can go a little bit too far. There's nothing in the Catholic position that says that we need to expend every last possible option to extend everyone, someone who's on their deathbed, that we have to do everything possible to extend their life just one more day, just one more 5 minutes. We don't have to do that. We don't have to do these Herculean efforts to extend somebody's life. But we also don't pull the plug prematurely. We have to respect life. Now, I've never been challenged with some of the things that some of you have probably been through. I've been very blessed with that respect. But it doesn't change the fact that while emotions play a part in these kinds of decisions, they shouldn't play the only part. We need to rely on our faith. We need to rely on God's truth. We need to go back to that. In order to try, modern culture does something crazy. In order to try and convince us that life is cheap, one of the lies that the world tells us is that suffering is useless. Is suffering useless? Look at the cross of Christ. Is suffering useless? Suffering isn't useless. This is where the church's teaching on redemptive suffering comes in. If you've never heard of this concept, please tune in for the next couple of minutes. This is beautiful. Pope John Paul II explains to us that Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, that awful suffering that he endured on the cross, was perfect. There's nothing lacking in his sacrifice. It redeems the entire world. But God also wants us to share. He wants to share everything with us. So he leaves a little sliver of that sacrifice open so that we can be a part of it. He opens a little bit up. He gives us the dignity to participate with that sacrifice, so that when we're going through things, we can offer up our suffering and attach it to the cross and be a part of redeeming the world. It's a beautiful concept. We can offer up our pain, we can unite our suffering to the cross, and we can do this when we're getting through an illness and we're suffering through that. We can do this when we're working overtime. We can do this when we're doing yard work. Anything that's like drudgery, that's a little bit of suffering, you can, if you're mindful of it at the time, Offer it up and unite it to Christ's cross. And you can do that and say, God, use this for my kids. Use this for my nephew. Use this for my niece. Use this for my cousins who are going through something. Use this to help them. The same way that you helped all of us. Thank you for giving me the dignity to be able to participate in that. Now, I'm going through something right now. I'm going to hand this to you. Use this. I'm going through this. There's nothing I can do about it. Use it. We can always be active, participating members of the body of Christ. We should offer it up. We can do that, like I said, when we're doing something simple like yard work, and we can do that on our deathbed. There will be a time, perhaps, depending on our circumstances in life, there'll be a time, for some of you it'll be decades and decades in the future, where we'll be on our deathbed. And we know that chances are we're not getting up out of this bed and we'll die here. And you go, I can't be an active participating member of the body of Christ. Yes, you can. You can offer up the suffering that you're going through and apply it to the church, apply it to your family members, apply it to that. Remember that for decades from now when you're going through that. You can still be active members of the body of Christ. So remember to offer it up. When we know that every single human being is precious, then we grow in virtue. In that. Number 6. The second bombshell of the night. The first one was, thou shalt not kill. The second bombshell of the night is, you shall not commit adultery. That's really not the bombshell, because I'm hoping that everybody in the room is not committing adultery. At least not now in the room. Maybe later. No, I'm just kidding. Hopefully, nobody is committing that particular one. But we're gonna combine the 6th and the 9th, because the 9th is kind of similar. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. That was a little bit harder, right? That was a little bit harder. Now, those two are kind of linked for obvious reasons, and even though it's worded in the male, you gals in the room, you can flip that. You shall not covet your neighbor's husband. You get the idea. But let's reword this in the positive. You shall control your passions. Period. You shall control your passions. That's the idea of heading in the direction of virtue. Now, technically, I don't think I need to explain this to anybody, but technically, adultery is sex between a married person and someone who is not their spouse. That's what adultery is. Jesus expands that, however, in Matthew chapter 5, verses 27 and 28, when he says, you have heard it said that you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. And that's a harder one to stay away from than that first one, because it's more mental and not just physical. This is why we can combine our discussions of number 6 and number 9. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. Positive again, you shall control your passions. So the second one, the 9th commandment, is sort of a mental version of the physical of 6. Now, one clarification on this, for those of you who struggle perhaps with this. A fleeting thought that you might have does not qualify as breaking this commandment. Everyone has fleeting thoughts. Everyone can look at someone and recognize that they're attractive. That doesn't break this commandment. You're allowed to recognize attractive people. It doesn't do that. It only becomes a problem when it becomes a willful situation, and you start dwelling on it or fantasizing about somebody. Then it becomes a problem. Father John Ricardo talks about a priest friend of his, whom he does not name, which is a good thing. He mentions that this priest friend of his, the way he deals with this is when he sees an attractive woman walks by, in his head, not out loud, in his head he goes, hello, pretty lady. And then he keeps walking. He doesn't turn around and start thinking. That's the difference. Keep walking, you're okay. Turn around, you're in trouble. So that's sort of where it is. I thought it was a cute anecdote, so I figured I'd pass it along. Now, Peter Kraft, in this book down here, he says that by its own admission, our modern culture says that the most unacceptable part of the church and its teachings is its teachings on sexual morality. Why is that? Well, some people would say that the church is obsessed with sex. It's not true. The world is obsessed with sex. The church is standing in the way. The church is obsessed with communicating the unchanging word of God. And the truth never changes. So the world desperately wants the church to get out of the way, and we refuse to do so because we're here to communicate God's unchanging truths that are good for us if we understand them. So we have to stay true to God's word. Think about this. Almost every controversial issue in the world today surrounds sex. Sex outside marriage, contraception, homosexuality, pornography, divorce, and once again, abortion. Abortion falls in here because some people demand to have access to abortion because they use that as birth control or as a last-ditch birth control. So they want to have sex, back to sex. They don't want to have the babies. But it's not just those who are outside the church who sometimes take issues with the church teaching. Some people inside the church struggle with understanding the teachings on matters that are related to sexuality. Why? Well, because the world tries to make us think, and this is really important too. There's been like 2 or 3 times so far I've told you to zero in on this one. The world tries to make us think that these issues are political. And they're not political. They're moral. And a moral issue goes back to God. A political issue we can vote on. And if I can get 51% of you to vote with me, then it's okay. But if it's a moral issue, there's only one vote. It's God. Go back to the Garden of Eden, right? Adam and Eve outvoted God 2-1. They wanted the apple. They got the apple. It was still wrong because there was only one vote in the Garden of Eden because it was a moral issue. Guess what? All of these things that I just mentioned, there's only one vote. So when people try and make it a political issue, they're trying to get around God. Be aware of that. You see somebody on the TV and they're going, we should be able to vote on this. You know, they're saying it in different ways, but we should be able to vote on this and then we should be able to do it okay. No, there's only one vote. It's God. Now, every once in a while, you'll see somebody on TV and it's political, and they're speaking politically, but they're standing for God's truth. In that case, root them on, okay? But the ones that want to just change things from a moral issue to a political issue, be very, very cautious of those people. It's a really, really dangerous thing to do. And a lot of people try and do it. Anyway, it's really, really important to recognize when our enemy is trying to reframe a moral issue and try and make it a political issue. This brings up another issue. We can look at Old Testament times, we can look at New Testament times, we can look at present day, and Peter Craiff mentions that human beings, we've never been really good at keeping the commandments perfectly. But in most of the time prior to our own time, everybody agreed that, well, we don't keep it perfectly, but we agree that the commandments are a good idea. They're a good ideal. I don't live up to them all the time, but that's a good ideal. That's what we should shoot for. Not so today, right? Go back to that commercial. We break 20% more commandments than any other, than our competitors. That's ridiculous. So today's culture doesn't even pretend to hold the commandments in esteem. It's an all-out war on God's plan for goodness. Many people are eager to rip whole sections out of the Bible, or at least certain passages out of the Bible, or maybe even just a few words out of the Bible because they don't want to have God's truth in front of their face. They want to pretend it doesn't exist. But it doesn't change the fact that God knows the spiritual world. We don't know it as well as we understand the physical world. He knows the spiritual world. He knows what's good for us. So he warns us. It doesn't change that fact. We don't get the spiritual world as well, so we need to trust God. And more importantly, if we rip certain things out of the Bible because they don't really align with what we want to do, if we just rip them out and therefore there's nothing there anymore to pull us back to God. We need to leave those pages in. And if we're weak and we can't actually do the things that God is asking us to do right now, leave the pages in the book. Because that's what's going to pull you back to God at some point. At some point you'll grow and you'll be able to be pulled back. But if you rip them out and say that they don't exist anymore, there's nothing pulling you back. You'll drift forever. Leave them in the book. Just deal with the fact that you're not quite there yet. Anyway, God has a plan for sex, and the church knows, God has a plan for sex, and God knows that certain deviations from that plan are harmful to us. So he warns us. And the church passes along those warnings. We shouldn't expect that the world accepts what God has to say and those warnings because the world didn't create those warnings. God did, and they're sort of at odds with him. Now, if we've just finished the second of 2 bombshells for the night, so the rest of this is going to go real easy for me. But if any of you struggle with any of the things that we just talked about for the last 15 or 20 minutes with regard to thou shalt not kill, respecting life and all of this sexual stuff. If you struggle with any of this stuff, then go to the Catechism and read about it, or perhaps quicker and more relatable, go to YouTube, find Father Mike Schmitz on Ascension Presents. He deals with these topics so beautifully. He's a wonderfully spoken young priest, and in like 5, 6, 7 minutes, he handles these topics. Just sort of like go through them and go, that's what I struggle with, and watch what he has to say. He brings things to the front that are just absolutely beautiful. Father Mike Schmitz, Ascension Presents on YouTube. Sometimes we need to be humble enough to just listen to God, because humility is a virtue, and so is chastity. On to the last 2 slides, which are non-bombshells, so I can breathe this sigh of relief. 7th and 10th commandments, these are also related, so we'll talk about them together. First, you shall not steal. Pretty obvious, won't take very much to go over this. And the second one is, you shall not covet your neighbor's goods, which you can see how that can possibly lead to stealing, so they're kind of related. It's the same impulse inside us. First, there's the literal meaning of steal, which is, literally to take something, to money, property, whatever else. But we can expand that in love and say that, well, if I steal somebody's reputation, have I stolen something of value from that person? If I speak ill of someone, might I keep them from being able to get a job promotion, or maybe even have them lose their job? That would be stealing from them. If I damage their property, key their car, whatever, toilet paper doesn't count. That washes away. It's okay. But if you happen to be an employer in this room and you pay someone an unjust wage, that's stealing from them. Now, that doesn't mean that, well, everybody deserves to be a millionaire, so you got to pay everybody a millionaire's wage. No, that's not true. If you haven't prepared yourself in life to deserve a good wage, then you shouldn't get one. But if you're an employer here and you've got somebody with skills, you should be paying somebody at least according to what that skill set deserves. Otherwise, you're stealing from them. You're violating this commandment. Sorry if you're an employer and you're doing that. Reevaluate, start paying. Hey, Joe, come on in. Let me start paying you more. Whatever. Why are you doing this? I heard this great talk last night. Whatever. Anyway, so this commandment happens to be the basis of the church's teaching on economics, and specifically our responsibility to give charitably to the poor. But we shouldn't just give over money to any charity, especially the big charities, because I love this. One of the Catholic principles economically is what's called subsidiarity, which means we should give things on the most local level possible. Why? Because there's accountability when it's local. If you give money to the UN food bank thinking you're helping people, how do you know if it's being used properly? You've got no idea. You want to give food to the poor? Right behind that door, right there, is the food bank here for the cathedral. Bring the cans of food of corn and bring it right to there. And then you can walk through there and see if they're doing it right. And if they're not doing it right, you stop giving it there and you find someplace else that is doing it right. You can never do that with the UN food bank. You can do it if it's local. Subsidiarity is a really important concept. Always do things at the most local level. Because we're called to charity, but we're also called to execute due diligence and to do charity properly. Because if we don't do that, then if you give to a bad charity, it's doubly bad. You've lost out because you've given it away, but the person who was supposed to get it doesn't get it because it's squandered. So it's doubly bad. It's your responsibility to have due diligence with charity. So stop giving it if it's a bad charity. Thus endeth my rant on bad charities. Last one, okay? The last number. Now, has anybody been keeping track? Because I've skipped around a little bit. Has anybody been keeping track? Which one's left? 8. Good. Okay. Some of you are like, when are you going to get to 8? He's right. Okay. So here's 8. Does anybody know what 8 is? You respect other people's property. Forgot to click. Does anybody know what 8 is? You all know this one, you just don't know it's number 8. See, we all know what the 10 Commandments are, we just don't know what the numbers are. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Okay? That's a negative, so we're going to reframe it in the positive. You shall be truthful. Much easier concept, but we're aiming towards virtue in that sense. So, first off, of course it means not telling lies, not committing perjury in court, not slandering somebody, but it's more than that. God gave us rational minds. We're supposed to be able to chew on facts and come up with an organized understanding of the world. And when you lie to someone, you deprive them of that oxygen for their brains. We can't operate properly. So lying is really, really bad. for somebody because they can't do anything. Now, by the way, some of you have noticed this because you've dealt with people like this. There are some people in this world who can speak actual truths but deceive you while they're doing it. You ever run across somebody like that? Ever done that yourself? Don't answer that. Okay. There are times when you know what the person wants to hear, you can actually speak the truth, but you know that you're deceiving them. It's still a lie. Still a lie because you're doing it with the intent to deceive. So if you've ever slid into that, it's still a lie. Don't do it. I'm speaking on behalf of God right now. Anyway, so we can also lie to ourselves. If we ever try and rationalize something that we know we shouldn't do, then we're lying to ourselves. Every intentional sin that we commit starts out with us lying to ourselves. I'm going to do this, and this explains why I can do it. And we're lying. So I'm old enough to remember a time when you could shake somebody's hand and you didn't need a contract. Zach, you and I are going to go into business, shake the hand. That's it. That's all we need to do. We don't live in that world anymore, unfortunately, but it would be nice if we all did, so we all should conduct ourselves that way because that lifts the world up, right? That's part of telling the truth. I'm also old enough to remember when science used to actually go after facts instead of, answer whatever it is that they're getting paid to answer. And it's unfortunate. So it's they don't actually have to go after facts. But I'm actually, in a very strange way, grateful for the fact that they've done this. And those of you who know my backstory, and most of you do, probably can understand why. I love math, I love science, I love chewing on facts, but about 13, 14 years ago is when somehow, somewhere in the back of my mind, I started realizing that facts were disappearing. They were being manipulated, and I didn't do this. It wasn't conscious, it was a subconscious kind of thing. And somehow I realized that we may get to the point where facts really don't exist, except in the Bible. And as someone who didn't believe in God and didn't believe in the Bible at the time, that's a very strange thing for me to realize, but that's what pulled me into Bible study, and that's what eventually led me into the arms of God. So in a very strange way, I'm actually grateful for those people that are trying to attack truth in the world, because it pulled me into God. And I believe that's happening now all over the world, all over the place. You see these, I don't know if any of you have seen the stories about, huge revivals of college campuses where hundreds of people are being baptized because they're just hungry for truth, because truth is disappearing in the world. They know that it's here. Somehow when truth is under attack, people turn to the most true thing that there is, which is God and his church. I know it happened for me, and I really do personally believe that truth is going to reappear in our culture. Hope I'm around long enough to see it really reappear in big sense. But for right now, at least, it makes us all and everyone else really appreciate when we do run across truth, right? When you do run across truth and you recognize it, you sort of smile. It's like, I like that, it's kind of fun. So be truthful, be someone whose word is their bond, and when you shake their hand, it means something. By the way, Zach, you and I, we could go into business on a handshake, not a problem. Sorry, you're both in the same direction. Christian, I've been trying to kill you all night long, and Zach, I say to you, I am so sorry. Just flip that around. I'm sorry. I'm going to have to apologize to you for the next couple of weeks. Sorry about that. Okay, in conclusion, I know you're all waiting for this screen. Frank Sheed is a Catholic apologist from 100 years ago. He used to talk at state fairs and stuff, and out there, and just really honed his edge. And just when he writes, he just writes so beautifully because the arguments have been refined over lots of times of talking with people. He says, if you want to know what something is, it's not enough to know what it's made of. It's not even enough to know who made it. You need to know what its purpose is. That's when you know what something is. What is its purpose? And he tells a story to try and illustrate the point. He says, imagine a man is out in the woods gathering firewood, okay? And he runs across a straight razor. And he's never seen one of these before because, he does the double-bladed, triple-bladed. He's, what we all sort of do. How many people shave with a straight razor in this room? See, so you're like, what is that? It's a straight razor. It's what the people who are not afraid of death use to shave. you flip that thing open, it's incredibly sharp, and that's how you shave. It's a straight razor. So he runs across this. He has no idea what this is for, but he realizes really quick that it's really, really sharp. And he's out looking for firewood. So he starts cutting the firewood with it. And very, very quickly, he dulls the blade, and it's absolutely useless. So he just throws it away because it's a hunk of metal at that point. It has no use at all. Why did it all go wrong? He had no idea what that thing's purpose was. So he started using it incorrectly. And the same is true for anything. We might mean well, but if we don't know what a thing is for, we can break it or dull it. We need to know the purpose of a thing. And the best way to do that is to consult the maker of the thing. We can't properly use our own life if we don't know what our life and our purpose is. And the best way to know our purpose is to go back to our maker. And luckily, God has revealed our purpose to us, which is to build up our virtue and to spend eternity in heaven with him. So that's why we've been discussing the 10 Commandments. Knowing and expanding upon them in the direction of love is what helps you fulfill your purpose, what helps bring meaning to your life. And it keeps you from becoming dull. So, grow in virtue, get to heaven. I hope you look at the 10 Commandments a little differently from this point forward. Thanks for listening. God bless you. God bless our country. And God bless the church all throughout the world.